I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to episode 115 of Dark and Stormy Book Club. Today we have an interview with Lori Rader-Day.
Lori Rader-Day is the Edgar Award-nominated and Anthony and Mary Higgins Clark Award-winning author of The Lucky One, Under a Dark Sky, The Day I Died, Little Pretty Things, and The Black Hour. She lives in Chicago, where she is the co-chair of the Mystery Readers Conference, Murder and Mayhem in Chicago, and the national president of Sisters in Crime. The Lucky One tells the story of Alice, who, as a child, was stolen from her backyard in a tiny Indiana community. But against the odds, her policeman father tracked her down within 24 hours and rescued her from harm. In the aftermath of the crime, her family decided to move to Chicago and close the door on that horrible day. Yet Alice hasn't forgotten. She devotes her spare time volunteering for a website called the Doe Pages, scrolling through pages upon pages of unidentified people, searching for clues that could help reunite families with their missing loved ones. When a face appears on Alice's screen that she recognizes, she's stunned to realize it's the same man who kidnapped her decades ago.
We are very happy to welcome Lori Rader-Day to our program. She has a fascinating new book out called The Lucky One.
Thank you so much for having me. Lori, we read that The Lucky One has a true story behind it. Can you let our listeners know about that? It's really kind of two true stories mashed together. The book started when I lived in Chicago, where the houses are really close together. On one side of us, the house was flipped, I guess is the term, and a cute family moved in next door. We share on that side a chain link fence that nobody likes. It's probably been there since the beginning of time. And we had once thought about putting a fence on our side of this fence, but we hadn't because it just wouldn't look good from their side and we just hadn't gotten around to it. But when I first met this cute little family, the mother and the little girl were in the backyard, and you have to talk to them whether you like it or not because it's so close. I met them for the first time, and the woman introduced me to her daughter and said, "This is Eden." And I had just turned in my last book, Under a Dark Sky, and the protagonist's name was Eden. At the time, I hadn't known anyone named Eden, and I don't usually use names of people that I know unless this is a charity bidding situation where people buy the chance for that. It just seemed odd to have this book coming out soon, and now I do know an Eden, and she's only 2 years old. So I had to tell the mom immediately, like, what I did and just let her know, and she was actually kind of excited about it. She was, yay, clapping her hands. Oh, that's fun. I don't think you're going to think so when you start reading what I write. We got to be quick friends. They're a delightful family. The next time I talked to her, we talked about the fence and how ugly, but if you wanted to replace it together, we could talk about that. And the mother said, oh, I would love to talk to you about the fence, but not because it's ugly, but because I'm afraid someone's going to reach over and grab Eden. And I am a sort of worst case scenario type person doing what I do. I hadn't thought of that. I said, oh, it's probably because I don't have kids. I never thought of that. And she's like, no, it's not because of that. It's because I was kidnapped as a child. That's why I'm so super protective and worried, because that's exactly what happened to me when I was 2 years old. So her story, very briefly, is that she was kidnapped by somebody in the neighborhood of her daycare who they didn't have enough adults probably for how many kids they had. Nobody really noticed, but she was only gone a few hours. She was safely returned. Nothing ever happened to the person who did this. It was sort of like a weird occurrence in her life. She was not scarred by it, but I was interested in the idea of a person who had had this story happen in her past and the family lore at this point. the only thing left in this residue is that she's overprotective of her own daughters. I thought that was just a really interesting aspect. And of course, that's not enough for a novel to be kidnapped as a child and returned a couple hours later unhurt. I was shopping around for ideas before that conversation, and I had been looking at a website called the Doe Network, which is a website that has cold case missing persons on half the site, and then cold case unidentified remains on the other half of the site. And what the Doe Network volunteers do is they try to find connections between cases on one side to cases on the other side, obviously because many of these people are some of the other people who have been found, but you just need a really good connection to be able to start the process of seeing if they are a match. And I was just very fascinated by some of the stories coming out of that website from the founder, Todd Matthews. I just was really fascinated by the aspect, and I had already been shopping, that's a word I use that I probably shouldn't, that site for trying to figure out what I could do with my interest in this site. And one day I was sorting those cases, and you can sort by state or by date. I had sorted by state and was looking in Indiana, which is where I'm from originally, and I saw a face that I recognized. In that case, it's another true story. It was a girl from my school bus who went missing when she was 12 years old, and I was 8. I should not have known her because if you remember childhood, you don't often know children who are that much older than you. But I did know her because we were on the same school bus, and one day at least we sat together and planned my birthday party. She helped me figure out what colors I should have and what I needed from the store. And then she was really disappointed in me on Monday when we didn't do any of that. But she supposedly ran away when she was 12. Her name was Jeannie Cole. She disappeared. She was supposed to be a runaway. 2 years later, the body of a young woman was found very near where I grew up and where she was missing from. But it wasn't her. It was her older sister who had been raped and murdered. Her name was Frances Annette Cole. She was obviously found buried properly. I'm pretty sure that they are 100% sure at this point that it was a stepfather problem. He died at an early age of cancer, I think, or heart attack. Afterward, they could compare DNA when that became a thing that they could do and did solve the case of that rape and murder. And they presume he also had something to do with the disappearance of Jeannie. But she's still missing and shows up on the Doe Network as a missing person because until her body is found, she is technically missing. So that's a true story that happened in my background. And then a true story that happened next door to my neighbor. Those two stories sort of smashed together in a weird way in The Lucky One. Alice Fine is a volunteer for a website like the Doe Network. One day she sees a face that she recognized, and it's the man who kidnapped her when she was a little girl, and she was returned safely, but she still remembers the guy's face. That is how The Lucky One got started.
Using crowdsourcing and a website like that was really an interesting angle for the book. Can you give our listeners that website?
If you Google the Doe Network, you will definitely find the website. The case I was talking about, it was founded by a guy named Todd Matthews, who's a really interesting guy. I interviewed him as part of my research for this book. He solved a 30-year cold case, unidentified remains. There was the body of a woman was found in Kentucky by a man who would eventually be Todd Matthews' father-in-law. Wilbur Riddle found this body, tried to figure out who it was for years and years and years on his own. And then his daughter married Todd Matthews, and Todd took the case over from his father-in-law and then spent 10 years of his own life trying to figure out who this woman had been, and finally did using rudimentary internet, like early chat room message boards, found a connection that led him to the right identification for that person, and then therefore proper burial under her name for the woman. The case is called Tent Girl. The website is www.doenetwork.org.
That's fascinating, huh?
It is amazing. Our technology just is incredible. Obviously, with this crowdsourcing angle, of course, the way they found the Golden State Killer through the genealogical research.
Yeah, familial DNA, one of the websites that someone's distant third cousin put their cheek swab in to figure out which country their ancestors are from, and also helped find a serial killer.
It's amazing. I think I would like to go on the Doe Network. I don't know that I have a lot of time to devote to that sort of thing, but the information that Alice was collecting in the book
just noting different tattoos and scars and eventually help locate or identify people. I just thought that was very interesting.
Absolutely. And the people who do this, they do devote quite a bit of time. I think it really becomes their, I don't want to say obsession because obsession sounds negative, but they really want justice for these people. They want the families to have closure, to have a proper place to mourn them, a real grave with a marker with the name on it. It matters. These volunteers, they're really focused on getting that closure for the families.
Alice is the protagonist in the book. There are references a couple of times to Alice in Wonderland. Is there a special meaning behind that for you?
In this case, I really just, when I named the character Alice, I don't remember where that came from. It was just a name I liked. Again, I don't normally name my protagonists after people that I have friends or family with those names. It's just a name I liked. But then I remember that the neighbor next door, their daughter Eden, suddenly she has a book with a protagonist named Eden that I've written, not a total accident. And then when the neighbor had her second daughter, guess what she named her?
Alice.
Yes, Alice. Again, just a total coincidence. I could have changed it, but she's like, no, I love it. Don't change it. Alice is just a name I like. But then once you're writing about a character named Alice, free associations start to occur, at least when I'm writing. At one point, Alice is thinking about running around, chasing her tail a little bit on something, and she feels like she's the white rabbit. It's just a story that I've always loved. One of my aunts gave me the book when I was really young. I mean, possibly at the birthday party that I planned with that girl on my school bus. I was around that age, but I was too young for the book or didn't find me at the right time until one day I picked it up and then it was just perfect. And I have loved that story ever since for a very long time. And so when the white rabbit occurs to you, you got to use it. So I sort of leaned into the Alice in Wonderland. I suspected that most Alices in America, at least maybe England as well, have an Alice in Wonderland connection. It's such a big historical story. So I was just guessing that someone would call her Alice in Wonderland affectionately and that she didn't mind so much.
I like that connection there.
Good.
Alice in Wonderland is one of my favorites. One of our favorite parts of the book is the relationship between Alice, Jubilee, and Lillian. They vaguely remind us of Michelle McNamara and Paul Haynes, who collaborated on I'll Be Gone in the Dark. Can you elaborate on your inspiration for this relationship?
I also love the parts with Alice and her friends from the Doe Pages. I did imagine a relationship among the volunteers for this site that probably doesn't actually happen because most of the volunteers, these real amateur sleuths who work online at sites like the Doe Network, they work in isolation. It's not probably a very communal experience in reality. And they probably do talk to each other online, but I don't think they do a lot of meetups. But there is a true crime community that's come out of podcasts like My Favorite Murder and other true crime podcasts. There is a meetup community going on right now because of those podcasts. And I thought, what if this site engendered that kind of relationship among the people who live in the same general area and they decide to have a meetup? I actually talked to Todd Matthews, the real website, about this because I worried that it wouldn't be realistic to his actual experience with the site he started. And he gave me permission basically to change whatever I needed to change. He's done a lot of TV and film work related to his expertise on this kind of thing. He said he was trying to get the show to do something like that, to actually get the people in the same place to work together, even though it wasn't based on reality, that it's a much more isolated experience because he thought it would make a better story. It would give characters more energy and ideas bouncing off each other. And that's all the permission I needed. I wanted to show different levels of engagement with the site. Alice is very tentative. She's kind of new. She spends her time that way. She's not years deep into her community the way that Lillian is. Lillian is the old guard, definitely sage, wise person who keeps things close to her chest. And then there's Juby, who is maybe my favorite character because she's deeper into the community than Alice is, but she's fun and she's bright. Everyone's sort of drawn to her. I don't know how the actual volunteers are. Maybe they're social beings, maybe they're not. But Juby seems like people want to be around her. And so it made sense that she and Lillian, who work together, are hanging out, even though they have very little in common except this one hobby that they've both come across.
They were great characters.
And I thought the way that you portrayed them was very realistic. I could put myself in, well, all of their places, that they're hesitant because they're really strangers to each other. Alice is unsure whether she wants to tell them things. So it came across very realistically, I thought.
The two women who have been doing this for a long time, but they haven't done investigations in real life the way that Alice is asking them to come along and do this thing. They're doing this thing together, and then they get to a place where they can maybe knock on the door and talk to somebody, and they sort of freeze, which was, I thought, if they're online amateur sleuths, that seems like a natural reaction to actually go and knock on a door. Wait, there's a line here, and we're not sure that we want to go over it.
We have a somewhat dubious connection because you wrote a short story for Murder a Go-Go's